So last time we
Yes.
recorded, you came prepared with like 3 different topics.
I was so prepared.
So this time I decided I would have today's topic and next week's topics that I have brought to you. I even gave you a half-hour forewarning
Yes.
about them, so you could actually prepare.
We did homework for this episode.
I've been thinking about this episode for a while, but I only warned you a half hour ahead of time. But food heist.
Food heist. Okay,
heist.
so this food heist is wonderful. Okay. So it doesn't start very intriguing, but becomes intriguing very quickly. So let me set the scene for you. This is last year in August in Amarillo, Texas.
Okay.
Hot, dry, 4:45 a.m. when no one's around. 3 guys crashed a truck into a liquor store called the Party Stop. And then they went inside to start stealing as much as they could.
Okay.
And obviously they didn't want to be recognized, right? So one of the guys stayed in the truck. One of the guys had a hoodie pulled low so you couldn't see his face. And one of the guys was in a full-blown dog costume. We will make sure that this image is given to Adam so he can get it up online somewhere. But yeah, in fact, the police aren't even sure if it is a dog or a reindeer costume. They suspect it might be a reindeer costume instead of a dog costume.
Okay.
But the image, there's actually several images from the security cameras, and it looks like a dog to me. Anyway.
So this is in the whole snack. We think this might actually be a dog?
Like a living dog. Like one of the characters from the Land of Imagination from Mr. Rogers.
Is grown up
Sneaked out.
to a life of crime after...
This is Daniel Tiger. The Land of Make-Believe. Yeah, I don't know.
We're stealing snacks.
What? They were stealing booze. Is that
I
snacks?
thought it was... it's a booze.
Yeah,
Nah,
it was a
never
liquor
mind.
store,
Liquor
not like
store.
a convenience store.
Okay.
No, so they're not...
I missed that part.
Yeah. I just love the level of planning. Like, it fits so many of the criteria for a heist.
Yeah.
Because they planned it in advance. They did it carefully.
They got a costume.
And yeah, the guy's like, I don't want to be recognized. And I hope that that's what it is. But I also kind of hope that that's just how he dresses all the time.
He's a furry. And he's just like...
And they're like, do we have to bring Reggie? And they're like, yes, you never let Reggie come on the heists. Let's let him come on this one.
He brought his fursuit.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I doubt that would be a good way to not be recognized because the fursuit's a little obvious.
He's there in his full
Yeah.
persona, as he is known in the community.
Yes.
This is an episode of Law & Order I really want to see. That would be great.
The furry, that's not a costume. That's just,
That's just how he is.
Yeah.
Whatever the one is that has like Ice-T, who's always astonished at everything. Him trying to get his head around furry culture.
what a furry is to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's this fun level of incompetence and competence, right? Like you said, they planned, but the best they could come up with was the reindeer costume that he got given by his grandma for Christmas 4 years ago. She's like, well, I guess I'll wear this. They'll be too busy paying attention to the costume to, I don't know.
He's thinking, I go in this store all the time, but never in a dog costume.
It's too bad it wasn't an armadillo costume for Amarillo.
For Amarillo.
What do you want to bet
The Amarillo armadillo.
is like the most common high school like mascot? Is there
nationwide?
No, in Amarillo.
In Amarillo.
Like,
Octavia can answer that because she's from there.
You're from
Octavia-
Amarillo?
are there Amarillo armadillos?
Do you know Reggie the furry?
Not personally.
Yeah, it's my brother.
You weren't part of the furry community in Amarillo?
Octavia's brother
Okay.
is our thief. We just outed him.
Sorry.
Actually, the mascot at Amarillo High School is a sandstorm.
A sandstorm.
Sandstorm.
They missed the chance to be the Amarillo
Amarillo armadillos.
armadillos.
A sandstorm is a pretty rad
It is.
thing, though.
That's true.
I
It's-
didn't
it's
know
way
you could
better.
have a sandstorm as a mascot.
I mean, you can have the concept of the
Students are
music.
cheering, "We are a sandstorm."
You can have the concept of jazz,
With the concept of jazz.
jazz music, as a
We are
concept.
individual particles moving chaotically as a body.
So.
The local baseball team is the armadillo.
The armadillos.
Oh well, they
Okay.
couldn't do that because they had that. Yeah. You
What
can't
if
be-
this is a high school mascot? Check and see if there's a high school in Amarillo that is like the dogs or the hounds or the something
Maybe-
like that.
no.
Or the reindeer,
He
because the
got
cops think that.
he got replaced by the sandstorm? He's out of work.
And he's just
just-
so bummed.
He's got to get booze, but he
He's
can't
like,
afford it.
I used to be able to buy booze with my sweet gig dancing at high school basketball games.
Now they got a sandstorm. They
Now
just
that
blow
I-
sand at the audience. It's way cheaper. It's replaced. It took my job.
Yeah.
Throw some sand in front of.
Do they have a guy dress up as a sandstorm?
I don't know.
Or do they just turn on a bunch of fans
Yeah,
and blow sand into the audience?
preferably the visiting team.
Oh, man. I love you, Amarillo, Texas. Thank you for being awesome.
Thank you, random furry / mascot.
Yeah.
Who created a bun? Did you say they drove into it?
They drove a truck
into it.
right
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah.
Smashed the windows.
That's
how
actually-
that's how they got the stuff.
It's a terrible idea for a liquor store. You're gonna break the liquor.
I know.
You do that for when you're like robbing, like I don't know.
A rubber ball factory?
There you go. Pillow factory. Yep.
A crash test dummy depository?
Exactly. Then you know which ones survive. They're the best
Yeah.
crash test dummies. That's how you rob them. Not a food heist though. So
No.
we can't really dwell
You
on
put them
that.
on the market as lightly used crash test dummy.
Crash test dummies.
Available cheap.
Vegetarians for cannibals. Vegetarian meals for cannibals.
Okay.
Right? Crash test dummy.
I mean, yeah.
yeah.
I
Think
guess.
could be food heist.
I don't know what a crash test dummy is made of.
Whatever
I
it
doubt
is.
it is vegetable matter.
I bet it counts as vegetarian. I bet it counts as vegan. Maybe
These are
not.
Fully vegan crash test dummies.
Yep.
Available now from dragonsteel.com.
You're a cannibal. You're trying to kick that habit.
It's like a tofurkey,
Yep.
but it looks like a dude. You can buy a full-size, 2-scale Brandon replica entirely made of tofu, and then you can deep fry it for Thanksgiving.
Do not say that. That's not vegan.
That's not vegan? Oh,
No.
because we deep fried it in
You
something.
deep fried it. Well, I suppose you can deep
You can
fry it.
deep fry.
Yeah, all right, fine.
They didn't deep fry it in like butter.
I mean, if it's an effigy of me, I require it to be butter.
All effigies of Brandon must be bathed lovingly in butter.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, remember back when we had a topic for this episode?
I have it right here.
What is
make
it?
it wiggle. I thought it'd be fun
Okay.
to talk about who we think the best living fantasy authors are.
Yes.
Partially because, we're steeped in this genre, partially because I'm very curious what names you come up with. So I pitched to Dan top 5 living fantasy authors
Living fantasy authors.
with whatever criteria that you want to use.
Yeah. This was hard.
And we stray away from like dunking on our colleagues.
Yeah.
Whatever, we wouldn't want to do a top 5 worst, but talking about the best
The bottom 5 fantasy authors in the world today.
is totally something that I think would be fun.
I was trying to think of the best name I could shout out, but I couldn't think of anything quickly enough that would have been funny and the person would have taken the joke well. Okay, so here's my thing. I came up with a list. I have a bunch of honorable mentions.
Yeah, I have a ton
runners
as well.
up.
And I have some disqualifications.
Okay. I did, as a rule, just exclude you out of the gate.
Okay.
Okay?
That's
Whether
a smart idea.
whether you're in the top 5 or not, I decided to not even think about that.
I did not exclude me. I just don't think I'm in the top 5. I think I would be in the conversation once you get below 5.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the conversation in top 10. I'm definitely in the conversation in top 20. I don't think I'm in the conversation
The
of
thing
top
is,
5.
because I looked up several lists online,
Yeah.
and you're on all of them. And usually people are doing like 15. Top 15 fantasy authors you should be reading right now, and you're on all of them. So I'm sure you're there, but
Yeah.
I didn't bother trying to place you anywhere.
I came up with 4 categories that I ranked
Oh,
my
okay.
authors in.
Oh.
Because, I'm me.
Give
Magic
them-
systems,
yeah.
rankings, things like that. So
Okay.
I ranked them by impact to the genre. Not to the, world, but impact to the genre. Fame and impact to the general pop culture
Okay.
schema. Quality of their writing, obviously, which is going to be really high for all of these, but there might be ones that are slightly better. And then versatility was a big thing for me as a
Being
fourth.
able to write more than one thing,
Yes.
or
Different genres, different styles, different series, and things like that. And that helped me narrow down to my honorable mentions versus my top 5 quite a bit.
Okay. Fame is definitely not something that I considered.
Okay.
In fact, most of my list is, I don't know. There's some on my list that are very weird. I was trying to find a nice balance between, impact on the genre, who are the godfathers and godmothers who impacted everything, versus who are the ones that are out right now that I think are, the future godfathers and godmothers, the ones who are changing the genre today.
That's what you're going to get that my list isn't going to have a lot of.
Okay.
But let me mention my disqualifications.
Okay.
I decided I would only consider you if you were primarily known or at least majorly known for fantasy. And I
Rather than
defined
something else.
fantasy as kind of our traditional look at fantasy. So I excluded Stephen King. Even though everything, or not most of what he writes would count as fantastical. Not shelved in the fantasy. He's written a couple straight up fantasies.
A lot of the Dark Tower stuff is just straight
Eyes of the
fantasy.
Dragon and Dark Tower, and I would argue most of his. But what he's writing about is not necessarily the fantasy, and he's not known for that. He would be number 1 if I didn't exclude him.
Okay.
In my opinion. For the same reason, I excluded Alan Moore.
Okay.
Because I'm like, comics, being able to write comics will be a part of this, but if you're known primarily for comics, I don't think that's in the realm, like the superhero comics for this.
That's fair. One of mine is dancing on the edge of that line, but we'll see.
And then I excluded primarily science fiction writers because it's fantasy. So no Ted Chiang, right?
Yeah.
Who would definitely make my list if we were talking science fiction writers writing today. So those are my disqualifications.
All right.
Do you want to do some honorable
I
mentions?
didn't really do any disqualifications other than what I already talked about. Yeah, should we do some honorable mentions?
Let's talk some honorable mentions.
There's some that I put on here because I believe that they are, still living icons who are, incredibly respectable, who absolutely influenced me, and I assume everyone else writing today. People like, I've got Gavriel Kay, Philip Pullman, Terry Brooks, right? 3 fantastic fantasy writers that have been around forever and still doing great stuff. Like Gavriel Kay is still publishing. I don't think Brooks is. I don't know about Pullman, but
Pullman and Brooks both have published, but they're both on my honorable mention list as well.
Okay.
With Terry, it was a just getting edged out in the kind of versatility realm. I know he's written some urban fantasy, and I know he's written, but he gets edged out a little bit there. And he's a wonderful guy, but I think he's definitely in the conversation in top 20. He didn't make my top 5 list.
Yeah.
He was one of the very close to my top 5 list, but did not make it. So, yeah.
Yeah, some other big ones in the genre right now. 2 who are actually really good friends of mine: Shannon McGuire, Victoria Schwab.
They are both on my list as honorable mentions also. And the main reason they didn't make it is the same reason I don't think I make it. In fact, I'm going to read off other names: Lee Bardugo, Jim Butcher, Pat Rothfuss, and like this whole category, Brent Weeks of those of us that I don't think have had long enough to have impact on the genre, fame, or to really prove versatility. Those I kind of all lumped together. So mine are gonna skew older because of my categories, right? Your versatility, your fame, your impact, I think are some things. So all of those people, Shannon was on mine, and she's like just very, very narrowly edged out.
Yeah, Sean and I actually put in my top 5 and then bumped her down.
She would be one of the ones, like, but also Victoria, Lee Bardugo. These are all like right here. I feel like we're all kind of in this same mold where none of us have really broken out from the rest of them. So
yeah, I agree with that. The last one on my honorable mentions list is probably, I don't know. This is a weird inclusion. It's just Samantha Shannon. Who Priory of the Orange Tree, which was a relatively big hit a couple years ago. I'm reading it right now, and I'm just loving every single word of it. I think she only has a couple of books out. No, she had a different series. I don't know. She's pretty big. I've only read one book of hers. I can't put her in my top 5 or anything. I just want to mention that her writing style is so beautiful, and I love it.
Okay. I've got a few other honorable mentions.
Okay.
One is Holly Black, who I haven't read enough to put on my list. I think she probably has the versatility and everything else. I just haven't read enough Holly Black.
Yeah. Holly Black was one I considered strongly as well. Love Holly Black.
I've read a couple of her books and really thought they were good. So Sarah J. Maas
I've only read one of hers. I read her very first one.
Author I haven't read enough. Definitely probably the most famous author who could make my list, who didn't.
Yeah.
But
massive impact as a writer.
As of fame, J.K. Rowling didn't make my list.
Same.
I think J.K. Rowling is definitely the most famous, and probably had some of the most impact. But I don't think, particularly in versatility, I think she's actually proven she's not very versatile. I think some of her screenplays have been just really bad. And
the thriller stuff that she's written.
I think she's kind of worked against her legacy in multiple ways across the last 10 years.
Yes.
There might be a time where I would have put her on this list. She doesn't make my list. Sapkowski doesn't make my list. I don't think the versatility is there for Sapkowski either, but I think he is an excellent writer.
Cool.
So.
All right, so that's your whole
That's
everything.
my whole, and
all right.
Now we go into...
Do you have a top 5 in order?
I do.
Sweet. So let's start with number 5.
Okay, do you want me to do mine first?
Yeah, let's hear
yours.
Okay,
you've already mentioned him. It's Guy Gavriel Kay.
Guy Gavriel Kay.
Gavriel Kay. So I think, Guy might be he's definitely one of my favorite writers of all time. Why does he make my list? Why does he not make it higher? I think that all comes down to fame.
Okay.
I actually added these things all up, and he's the only one that just got almost a nil in fame. Nobody except fantasy, hardcore fantasy nerds know who Guy Gavriel Kay is, despite him having, as I've mentioned many times before, had something to do with the Silmarillion that we don't know quite how much he had to do.
And decades of incredible work.
Decades of incredible work. Taigana, Lions of Al-Rasan, his newer stuff is all just beautiful. Talk about beautiful prose.
Oh, yeah.
He's enormously versatile for that reason. You've got like standalones, you've got series, you've got literary pieces, you've got more market-friendly pieces. He can do it all. He wrote in Tolkien's world. He wrote an RPG character or players get sucked into a fantasy world series back in the 80s when those were big. He did one of the big ones of that.
So many different things.
A super nice guy. I got to have dinner with him at one point.
And incredibly friendly to aspiring writers as well. I know several friends who I've actually never had the opportunity to meet him, but I know I've talked to several other writers that said that he was one of their good buddies that helped them out when they were just breaking in.
I think he gets some serious points for impact on the genre quietly from behind the scenes that I think a lot of us of our age read Guy Gavriel Kay and kind of had that moment where our minds were blown by what a fantasy novel could do.
Yeah.
At least I know that happened to me.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think he shows, if you haven't read Guy Gavriel Kay, he writes what feels like historical fiction
Yes.
set in a different world. Very low magic in most cases. And the world building is so much more about culture than about how many orcs live in the forest, which really changed the way that I look at fantasy. That it could be so much, more deep world building rather than wide world building, I think is the way to describe it.
Well, and when I was reading him, first encountered him, I still read him. I was very into the long epic fantasy series, which don't get me wrong, I love.
Yeah.
But then I read Taigana, I'm like, oh, you can do this in one book? It reads like Dune, right? Where it's like everything is in one novel. And I'm like, it broke my brain a little bit and taught me a lot about what a fantasy novel can do. And even from the beginning, he's been a bit literary, but lately, like Under Heaven is just gorgeous. The prose in that, I've gushed about it before.
Yeah.
So that's why he's on the list. Impact on the genre, his versatility, his quality, why he doesn't rank higher. I just don't think he's had much of an impact on pop culture other than some involvement in Silmarillion, which we don't know how much that was. So,
my favorite of his is Lions of Alrasan.
it's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
I recently read, I think it's called Children of the Sun and Moon, which is kind of Croatia-ish area, Albania, kind of inspired by that. I love him. The reason that I've got him as a runner-up rather than a top 5 is because for me, I feel like he focuses so much on this kind of slice of life of these characters that there isn't as much plot.
That's fair.
That's kind of how I pitch Samantha Shannon to people. It's like Guy Gavriel Kay, but with dragons and a storyline.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
And the other criticism that people might want to know, he does write in this kind of older Tolkien-esque, slower paced, focus on the language style that was much more popular in the 80s. And his style has changed over the years, but it still is this slow meditative prose, which might not be for everyone.
Yeah. If you are willing to kind of sink into the book and just kind of follow these interesting characters in a very rich world, Guy Gavriel Kay will just astound you. So highly recommended, even though he's.
I mean, if you're in the running for top 10, I think that
he's if this were a top 10 list, he'd absolutely be in my top 10.
I think I don't know, but I think most authors would take anywhere in the top 10 because we know once you get to that realm, the dividing point between who is number 9 and who is number 7 is so fine. Yeah, like most of mine, I numbered these are one number off from each other.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay. All right. You ready for my number 5?
Yes.
Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
I assume he's in your top 5 somewhere.
He is my number 4. So we can just talk about him right now.
Talk about him.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman, American Gods was his first one of his first big books. It's one of my favorite books of all time.
Content warning.
Major content warning.
There's slight content on Guy Gavriel Kay. On American Gods, there's
a lot.
You'll know in the first couple chapters, I think.
But he has this facility with kind of strange, otherworldly Earth.
Yeah.
And most of his books are set on Earth. He's got a few like Stardust where you go into a fantasy world, but most of them are just on Earth, where you are seeing the weird, fantastical elements hiding on the fringes of society.
Yeah.
And like Neverwhere, American Gods does this. So many of his books, I think, and as much as I love American Gods, I almost want to say Nancy Boys is my favorite of his because Nancy Boys blows my mind right out of my head.
I mean, I really like Graveyard Book. I think it is a
Graveyard Book is incredible.
brilliant execution and a brilliant idea brought together.
Yeah.
So that would be my favorite of his. Part of why he makes my list is he got a 10 out of 10 for versatility. Because I think he is the most versatile author on my list.
Really?
This is because I told you not mainly comic books, but he does everything. He did do like a major fantasy comic book series that reads much more fantasy than like Sandman is just there's
Sandman does not feel like a superhero comic,
Yeah.
even though it technically sort of is.
Yeah. But plus screenwriting, show running, like I think
Novels, comics,
Yeah.
short stories, TV, movies.
Mm-hmm.
He does everything, and he does everything really well.
Yeah, like this is, I think, his strongest suit that got him this high on my list is just being enormously versatile and doing it all super well. Children's books, right? Like Coraline and
Graveyard Book.
Graveyard Book, but they're both even different genres of children book, right?
Yeah.
Like everything that he does is something new. Norse gods, completely different, right?
I loved his Norse Gods book. The reason that I've got him as low as I do,
Yes.
and 5 is not low by any stretch, right? Is I feel like, and it was Ocean at the End of the Lane that really hammered this home for me, is in some ways I feel like he is writing the same thing over and over. Ocean at the End of the Lane is essentially the same plot as Graveyard Book, to the point that it really bothered me. However, it evokes very different emotions. It does very different things. It speaks to a different audience. So it's still good, but there's this in my head. I'm like, okay, come on, do something new. Do something new. Shock me again the way you've shocked me in the past, which is not a fair thing to ask of any author. And he's definitely one of my favorites. But yeah.
With me, he scored a 32 out of 40 possible points. And the next one was 33, and the next one was 34.
Oh,
so it's kind of
okay.
like it could go any direction. He just landed there because I'm like, all right, if I'm comparing these people and whatnot, yeah. So
one of his that we haven't talked about, and we should because it's getting is Good Omens.
Good Omens,
Which is getting a season 2 of its show coming up pretty soon.
which is pretty amazing considering the first season covered the whole book.
Yeah. You covered the entire book, start to finish. So Good Omens is a fun one to read because for the most part, I think I know exactly which parts he wrote and which parts Terry Pratchett wrote, right? I'm
We all
sure
think
I'm
that.
wrong about some of them.
I think that too, but
Yeah.
it does feel like the perfect blending of their two interests and voices.
Yeah.
I love the book. The television show is better. It is Neil taking a chance to take and revise and tweak some things to make it have a slightly stronger ending and things like this. You are missing some of the viewpoint perspective stuff and some of the humor from Pratchett of the book, but the show is fantastic.
See?
And Neil show ran it.
I will disagree.
Okay.
Because I felt like in the TV show, the group of kids coming together as the Four Horsemen didn't land.
Okay.
And in the book, it did.
For
And-
me, in the book, it didn't.
Really?
And in the show, it was just slightly better.
Okay.
It still is not my favorite part of the book, but in the story, in the book, that's the part that just doesn't land for me.
Okay. That's totally fair.
Yeah.
In the movie, in the TV series, it felt like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and by the way, check out some symbolism.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to the story. Whereas in the book, it felt more meaningful. And I haven't read the book in like 20 years. So
My favorite parts of the books are Crawley and the angel just, and the movie just leaned into that, or the television show leaned into that so much that.
Well, and the TV show did The Witch.
Yes.
Yeah, so much better, I think, than the book did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of things worked really well. And
anyway.
yeah, he was the main writer and showrunner on that.
That's a part of like that 10 out of 10 versatility to me is like, I couldn't go do that. I'd like to be able to someday, but he went and did it. Didn't he He wrote, I want to swear he wrote like the adaptation for Mononoke into English. Wasn't that Neil
did.
Gaiman? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
He wrote that translated script.
right.
And prior to Good Omens, he had a lot of TV experience
Yeah.
doing other things. There's the American Gods show, which didn't really work, which is too bad. And also, like Neverwhere was actually started as a radio play script that he then adapted into a novel. So he's been around forever. He's written everything. Definitely one of the giants.
So now I'm really curious to see where you go, because you told me beforehand that there would only be one name that I would expect on your list.
Yeah, that was him.
And now I know, oh, that's him. So I'm very curious what the rest of your list is, and if I've even
right.
heard of them.
Well, do you want to hear my number 4?
I do want to hear number 4.
So, as I typically do when I am forming these kinds of lists,
Yep.
I will focus. Like I said, I didn't consider fame at all. I am looking instead at the people who have shown me something new and fascinating. People who I think have proven themselves to be incredible authors, even if they're not super famous. And so number 4 on my list is Matt Ruff.
Okay.
Matt Ruff wrote Lovecraft Country, which got a big HBO adaptation. He wrote one of my favorite books ever, which is called The Mirage, which is an alternate kind of dimension story. It is if I can describe it very briefly, the first chapter is about a cop in Baghdad, which is the center of world politics and commerce, watching as American Christian terrorists fly planes into the World Trade Center in Baghdad.
Okay.
And then in chapter 2, while investigating to try to figure out who did this, he finds a headline describing 9/11 from our perspective in our world. And then you get this incredible back and forth between the two. It is one of the most audacious fantasy books I have ever read, in the way that it uses real world characters and politics and religion and puts them on their head.
Is that fantasy or science fiction?
I am calling it fantasy.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. There it could, like, what is alternate reality? Is that a fantasy or is that a science fiction? It gets a pretty fantastical explanation. Like, there isn't a machine that helps them travel between worlds.
You step into the aurora and it,
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's just the mirage that kind of veils the two worlds from each other, and someone figured out how to cross it.
Okay,
So,
that's very fantasy.
yeah. And then you've got, Lovecraft Country, which is a retelling of a lot of Lovecraft stories from the perspective of a black family in Chicago before the civil rights movement. And it is really cool. And it doesn't surprise me at all that it got picked up to be a show. I wish the show was better than it was, but he is just a really good writer who does cool things that I've never seen anyone else do before. And I love that.
That's awesome. That's what I was hoping your list would be full of. Because my list is going to be a little bit more what people expect. There's one more curveball in here. It won't be surprising to people who know what I like.
Yeah.
But so my number 3 is N.K. Jemisin.
Very good. Yeah. I really struggled with putting her on my list because she is huge. She is absolutely one of the giants astride fantasy today. But I like her stuff without really loving her stuff. I love the Killing Moon series.
Okay.
Love it. But like 100,000 Kingdoms and 5th season and stuff didn't land as well for me.
And they did land for me. But so number 1, there is that. They totally landed. Like 100,000 Kingdoms is still one of my favorite fantasy novels of all time.
Yeah.
So her writing really, that line, like I've talked about this line before. I feel like there's like this continuum between what we might call, how should I say, market friendly and literary, right? And they don't have to be a dichotomy. You can do both, right? But if you imagine a continuum, there's this like line in the middle where on this side, you're using generally the literary traditions. And on this side, you're generally using the kind of market fiction traditions. And it's like Pat Rothfuss, who was on my list as honorable mention. I mentioned him. Is like just over the line onto the side where the market friendly, and she's like over the line into the literary. Using some of this, but mostly basing hers in the literary tradition, and that just really lands for me.
Yeah. I mean, she's a fantastic writer. She's won a zillion Hugos.
Yep.
And I think very deservingly. Like I said, the Killing Moon series is one of my favorites.
Like I mentioned that there's this whole category of authors like myself that I don't think have quite broken out, right? Like, we're dominating the genre, but there's not that thing that really makes us stand out, nor is the exception to that. I feel like she's the one that's just kind of smashed through that.
Yeah.
So her impact on the genre is enormous. Her fame is probably what's holding her back on my list, is that I think while in the genre she's really well known, her fame, like, nationwide is not that of not like Neil, for instance.
And really what that comes down to is that she hasn't had a TV show, right? All of the ones that are household names like George Martin and Neil Gaiman, it's because they've had multiple TV shows and everyone knows who they are.
Yeah, though there's also that's absolutely what it is, right? So you're right. Though Lee didn't, she was one of my honorable mentions. She has a fantastic TV show. So
yeah. Well, and speaking of TV, and even though I said I liked the 5th season without loving 5th season, I think it would make a great TV show. That's the most adaptable of hers, I think. I suspect.
Yeah, the main gimmick will play in television very differently than literary, but I think it'll play really well.
Yeah.
All right, what's your number 3?
Okay, my number 3 is G. Willow Wilson. This is the one that dances on the edge of that comic book creator line.
I have no
right?
idea who this is.
Okay, so she is a writer who kind of the main thing she is known for is she writes Miss Marvel. She, as far as I am aware, actually created the character of Kamala Khan, who's the teenage Muslim girl who becomes Miss Marvel. And that's what she's known for, but also she is a Hugo-winning novelist. And her novel, Alif the Unseen, is top 5 fantasy novel for me.
Okay.
It's one of the greatest things I've ever read. And it is a borderline book. It's not quite cyberpunk, but it is about a hacker. It's all very real-world computer hacker stuff.
You and your science fiction
in the Middle East,
writers.
but here's the thing.
Sneaking into our fantasy list.
It's also an urban fantasy. And he is able, through his coding, to summon jinn and to cross over into other worlds. There's a sequence where he is able to write a program that is so perfectly worded and flawless that it alters reality itself.
All right.
It is absolutely a fantasy book. Unquestionably, and one of the best fantasy books of the last 10 years, no question.
I want to see if an epic fantasy or secondary world fantasy makes your list at all. Because so far I have 2 of those out of my 3, and you have 0.
I know. They've all been very urban fantasy. Don't worry, the last 2 are secondary world.
Okay. Shall we go to my number 2?
Yeah, let's hear your number 2.
All right. My number 2 is one that I don't think might not make a lot of people's lists, just because various reasons to talk about. It's Jane Yolen.
Oh yeah.
I don't think
she's a good one to include. I hadn't even thought about her.
So why I don't think people might not put her as the number 2, which I do, is because they will probably look down at her children's books and things like that, which were where a lot of her fame is coming from.
Yeah.
How did dinosaurs say goodnight and things like that. Like, she's getting points on my list because my children know who she is. That might not, other people might not make. But her lowest is probably still kind of this impact on the genre sort of thing. Like, I don't know if a lot of writers, I talk to writers, and not a lot of them will come up with Jane Yolen, even though they've read her as a figure that had a big effect on them. But
Yeah.
she definitely did on me.
No, she's a really good one to include.
And she and my number one both got a 10 out of 10 on quality and versatility.
Yeah.
Which they're the only two that got 10s in both of those.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure at this point that I know who your number one is.
Yes, it's very, very obvious.
It should be very obvious.
Yes.
Yeah, she is one that I was going to put on my
honorable mentions
and forgot.
And if people don't know, Jane can write everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like she has her short story collections that she's been kind of putting out lately, kind of Jane Yolen's collected short story works in a new set of things with Tachyon. Will just show you the breadth of her skill.
Yeah, she's always been excellent, and she's always been kind of under the radar.
Yep.
I think of her as very mid-list. I would love to see a Jane Yolen renaissance when a new generation discovers her and turns her into a giant instead of a...
And I legit think she is, just craftsmanship-wise, the number 2 fantasy writer, or, equal to the number 1, just not as famous, writing today.
Okay.
Jane's amazing, and everybody should read Jane's work.
Read Jane Yolen.
Yeah, go get the Emerald Circus, the short story collection, or this the Scarlet one that I wrote a forward to, I believe. But she's really good. So what can I say other than you're not reading Jane Yolen, and you probably should be. So
okay. My number 2 is actually very similar.
Okay.
I asked you when you proposed this idea, I said, do you mean writers who are alive today or who are actively working today? And you said they just have to be alive.
Yep.
Robin McKinley.
Robin
is
McKinley
still alive.
Is amazing.
She's 70 years old. I don't believe that she is actively publishing. She is one of the 4 authors that turned me into a fantasy fan. When I was a kid, it was Tolkien, Fred Saberhagen, Anne McCaffrey, and Robin McKinley. I've read probably everything she's ever written.
Yeah.
And she's incredible.
Yeah.
I feel bad because her writing style is a little old-fashioned.
It is.
And so, like, when my daughter finished all the Harry Potter books and loved them, and she was like, please give me something else to read, and I gave her The Hero and the Crown, and she bounced off of it like a wall.
Yeah.
Because it isn't as readable for a modern audience. There's just a different style to it.
Blue Sword
but she's so good.
Is Emily's favorite book of all time.
Yeah.
My wife, Emily. In fact, we have... sometimes people will be able to see all of them once Adam does his final reveal. But in my lair, we have 10 stained glass windows based on fantasy books, and one of them is the Blue Sword.
And it's gorgeous. Yeah. Boy, her secondary world stuff like Blue Sword and Hero of the Crown, her fairy tale retellings.
Yeah, oh yeah. Outlaws of Sherwood, just really good book.
I read that one in 6th grade when it came out and was like, okay,
I read
is
that
incredible.
Much later. I was in my 20s when I read it, and it still was great.
Yeah.
So, Emily loves, I think Beauty is her second favorite.
Beauty's really good. There's a little free public library in my neighborhood that my 7-year-old and I will walk there and back every now and then. And I went there last week, and they had Robin McKinley's Sleeping Beauty retelling, which is actually the one of hers that I don't think I've ever read.
Okay.
And I immediately grabbed it and took it home. So that's on the pile on the nightstand now.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, that's a good choice. I'm glad we got to bring her up. She's not on my list because I know she's a fantastic writer, and it just didn't quite hit the radar. Should have, because it's Emily's. She's Emily's favorite. Didn't have as big an impact on me as some of the others, but definitely deserves to be in the conversation.
A lot of her stuff is very. I mean, she was writing YA before that was really codified as a category, right? And so, if you read her in your 20s rather than in your 11 and 12, it's going to land a little differently.
All right, my number one.
Your number one.
Not very surprising. Well, I had a possible 40 points, and they got 39.
Nice.
39 points out of the 40 points.
Okay.
And yeah, it's George.
George.
Yeah, it's George.
Okay.
So
I actually thought I thought you were going to pick Robin Hobb.
Where
Yeah.
Robin Hobb definitely may. She
Yeah.
should definitely be. I should have.
She's very honorable mention there.
She's very. We should have brought her up. I wonder.
Yeah.
I should have run the numbers on her. Here's the thing. It's very like when you've got Neil and George on the list with the fame and the impact, it's harder to it's on my list. It's going to be harder to place high when I run the numbers. Like I ran the numbers. I'm like, where would I put Rowling on any of this? And she just couldn't compete because she's got this side, but she doesn't have this side. People who have both sides are hard to come by. I think both the quality versatility and the impact thing. Robin Hobb probably would, if I had even thought to put to run the numbers on her, she might have beat Guy.
She might have beaten Guy.
Yeah. I'm not sure. It's hard. It's hard when you get these quality considerations. All of my on my quality list, because they all have a 9 or a 10. Right?
Yeah.
So
because they all do. They're
all
at the
do.
top.
So it comes down to versatility, fame, and impact, which is determining who's making it where on my list. So
I bet more people have read Robin than have read Guy.
Yes, I would agree with that. But is Robin as versatile?
I don't know.
Now is Robin is versatile? I don't know.
It's a tough call.
It is a tough call. I should have. Yeah. Didn't even occur to me to run the numbers on Robin Hobb. I bet she would. I bet she would take number 5 if I actually sat down because she's had a huge impact on our generation of writer, and she's still writing great stuff. Is she on your list?
Just as honorable mention.
Yeah. So all right, mine is George. My number 1 is George. So why is George number 1? Well, name who's the most famous fantasy author alive right now?
George Martin.
J.K. Rowling, but who's number 2?
George Martin.
That's why George is a 9.
Yeah.
Is because I'm like, all right, there is somebody more famous than him. Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, he is like
I'd put him on the same tier.
Would you
as
give him
Rowling and King?
So okay.
Everyone knows who Martin is.
We'll give him a 10. He's a 10 out of 10.
That gives him 40 then?
He gives him
out
40.
Of 40.
Impact. George Martin changed this genre dramatically from the launch of the first book.
Oh, yeah.
I cannot think of someone, even including Nora, who had huge impact of bringing kind of literary fiction and stuff in. I cannot think of a single person who's had a bigger impact on the epic fantasy genre than George Martin has since Tolkien.
It is so hard to point to any single author and say they created a subgenre all of their own, and he did. Grimdark, from the instant Game of Thrones came out and everyone was like, oh, wait, this is the most adult fantasy I've ever seen, and then everyone in the whole world copied him.
Yeah, everybody... And
you even started writing grimdark stuff.
Before I broke in, everyone told me this is what we want, so I tried writing it. I was terrible at it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, those books never got published. But but this is what everyone was writing. And so 10 out of 10 for impact on the genre.
Yeah.
I have trouble imagining someone other than Tolkien who's had a bigger impact on epic fantasy than George has.
Epic fantasy, you're probably right.
I mean, Anne McCaffrey, maybe, during those early days of cross.
I was so sad that I couldn't put Anne McCaffrey on my list.
Maybe we'll have to do greatest dead authors. Maybe we won't rank them. Maybe we'll just talk about. But we go to quality. George is a 10 out of 10. Like everybody that's making this list, George has this amazing ability to characterize characters in a short amount of time and keep them all magnificently distinct in your mind.
Yeah.
So, and then versatility. I also gave him a 10 in versatility because I have read George's short fiction and his epic fantasy and his novels. And I have said before, I'm not a Game of Thrones fan.
Yeah.
Too dark for me. Daenerys was too much. But I can appreciate the skill that went into writing them. And I've read a lot of other George stuff that I really, really like.
Yeah.
And so he can write that. He can write screenplays. In fact, some of the best the episodes of the television show that were best received, he wrote. He has written children's books. Hugely versatile writer who is doing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
He's slow at all of it, but he's a great editor. I've had the privilege of being edited by George, and he's a really good editor. He's everything. And so I couldn't not put George at number one for all of those reasons.
And not just fantasy. He was known primarily as a science fiction writer for decades before Game of Thrones came out.
Plague Star. It's one of my favorite stories.
Go read The Sand King, Sand Kings, which is a kind of novelette length science fiction story. He's so good. Sand Kings is one of the only things I've ever read that made me shout out loud in fright. So yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Good one to include.
When I came up with the numbering system and I started numbering them, I'm like, all right, this is going to put George at the top. But I mean, that's probably where he deserves to be. I'm curious who your number one is.
Okay. So when you proposed this list, I knew my number one immediately. Okay. And then I had to build the rest of the list. And I don't think you've even read her.
Who wrote Ratatouille? It's got to be that. Is it Brad Bird who wrote Ratatouille? Yeah.
Ratatouille! Yeah. I will just include it on every list regardless. No, Fonda Lee.
Okay, I have not read Fonda Lee.
You haven't read. So the Greenbone Saga, Jade City, Jade War, Jade Legacy.
Pitched those a number of times.
I know.
And I've actually several times been like, oh, what's that author Dan keeps telling me to read? And I had forgotten. And so I read something else instead. So.
If someone were to ask me who writing fantasy today is going to be the next change, the next George Martin who changed the way that everyone writes, Fonda Lee.
Okay.
I would put money on it. She was nominated for the series Hugo this last year, and she didn't win. Shannon won, and Shannon, again, like we said, is awesome. Yeah. The Wayward Children series won the series Hugo. And
how many of those does Shannon have now?
There's like 9. And they're excellent. But the Greenbone Saga, people will still be talking about and emulating for years to come. She is going to have such a huge impact on the genre. Jade War, the second of her series, probably my very favorite fantasy book of all time. Definitely top 5. But I think it's the very top place. And she did some like science fiction, YA stuff before that. For people who don't know, and I've talked about her before, so you probably do know, but just in case, Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee is epic fantasy about factions, scheming, and family drama. But instead of being set in like a medieval era, it's a world that is kind of analogous to a 1970s Hong Kong gangster movie. And it is so richly done. The kind of main character of that series, Hilo, one of the most complex, interesting, and well-drawn characters I've ever read. Fonda is, for me, the obvious choice for number one.
And there's going to be all sorts of people in the comments saying, what about this? What about this? Of authors that probably would have made our honorable mentions. Like, I forgot to mention Lois. And she's mostly known as science fiction, but she won a Hugo for a fantasy novel. It's really good. And she definitely deserves to be in the honor mention. Robin Hobb, I should have... I think she's probably would make my list if I...
There's so many people, and a lot of this is hard because we know so many of these people. Like, I've done booths with Robin so many times.
Oh, she's the first person who told me when I was on tour. She's like, "You're working yourself too hard. This is bad for you. Step back." And that was the tour that I collapsed on the floor when I got back to my room. She's the one who noticed. She's kind of like, she's very motherly to all of us. She cover quoted Mistborn, my first cover quote from someone I didn't know. Was from her that I'd met her. I asked if she would read it. I sent it to her. Her daughter read it, said, "No, Mom, actually read this." And she did, and she gave me the nice cover blurb.
Her daughter's really cool too.
Yeah. So
So
Mm-hmm.
Bunch of great people on this list.
So there's going to be people that you're going to be in the comments and be like, what about this person?
Yeah.
I gave Dan a half hour, and then I sat for 5 minutes when he arrived here, and this is how we came up with our list.
This is what we did. So,
So-
like, Kevin J. Anderson is going to text me later and say, why did you not put me on your list?
Kevin J. Anderson's
You jerk.
best stuff is science fiction.
I know. He's primarily a science fiction
He
guy.
does fantasy, but Saga of the Seven Sons is
does
his
it
best,
good.
his best work.
But
And-
yeah, so he I excluded because he's primarily a science fiction guy.
Mhm. Yep. Does he watch our podcast? He doesn't watch
No,
our podcast.
there's no way he watches our
He doesn't have time
dumb
to watch
little
our podcast.
Dog and pony show
Yeah.
that we do here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, there you go.
There we are. All of our friends that we forgot to mention. We're sorry. You would have made our list. But
I do
we
need
just-
to specifically say Brent Weeks and Brian McClellan. I love you.
I did mention Brent. I forgot
You
Brian.
did mention Brent.
I forgot Brian.
We forgot Brian.
He's
I'm
in
also going to mention Charlie Holmberg because she does watch our show
Oh, no.
religiously. And I've got to say, she's my real favorite. I just put these other people for political reasons.
we can't say Charlie. I mean, we know her too well, and therefore we're biased.
Yeah.
And there you go.
I had to exclude her for the same reason I excluded you.
She writes good stuff. Charlie does. So
Mm-hmm.
I should have her. I don't think she's ever been on my channel, has she? No. We should have Charlie
We
on.
should bring her in.
She'll make fun of me, but
Yeah.
people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Ben likes that. How's that, Ben?